The first time I heard the hog scream that way, I thought it was a woman calling for help. It was late summer, the kind of heat that makes the air feel thick enough to chew, and I was riding alone along a ridge road that cut through cornfields and scrub oak like a scar. The sky had turned the color of old bruises, not from storm clouds but from the sun sinking into a haze of dust and smoke. Every mile of that road felt empty, the way a room feels empty after a funeral. And then those screams rose from somewhere ahead, long and wet and almost human. I remember slowing my horse, trying to tell myself it was only hogs fighting over slop, only the natural noise of a farm at feeding time. But the sound did not stop when I passed the next bend. It followed me, as if the land itself wanted me to understand something before I reached the house at the end of that lane. What I found there would take years to make sense of, and even now when I speak the details out loud, I still taste iron in the back of my throat. Before we go any deeper, tell me in the comments where you are listening from, and if this is your first time here at Tales Never Told, don't forget to subscribe, because the road we are about to walk is one most people never come back from the same. The town was called Harrow Creek, a place that lived in the folds between larger cities, too small to show up in most newspapers, unless a flood took a bridge or a preacher ran off with choir money. It sat beside a crooked stream that was shallow in summer and angry in spring, and it survived on hogs, corn, and the stubbornness of the families who had settled there when the country was still a patchwork of promises. People in Harrow Creek knew each other the way roots know soil. They fought, they borrowed, they gossiped, they married cousins without shame, because the world beyond the ridges felt further away than the moon. The ridge road was their lifeline. Peddlers used it to sell tin pots and lace. Drovers used it to move cattle west. Runaway boys used it to leave and sometimes to come home again. That road always had someone on it, and until the summer the travelers started disappearing. At first it was easy to blame bad luck. A man named Walter Hume, a carpenter from the river towns, came through with a wagon full of tool chests and never arrived at his next stop. Folks said he must have taken a wrong fork and drowned in the marsh lowlands. Then a young couple from up north vanished. People said bandits were drifting down from the war-ruined states. Then a German peddler who spoke poor English went missing, and no one even learned his full name. The sheriff, Alden Pike, called it a pattern only when the fourth person failed to show. But by then the pattern already had teeth. Every missing traveler left behind a story, and every story found its way to the same place. A solitary farm about a hard day's ride from Harrow Creek, where a man named Enoch Straley sold pork cheaper than anyone else in the county. Enoch had come to the ridges a few years earlier, arriving with a mule, a small pile of tools, and a Bible that looked like it had been read until the print thinned. He was not born there, which made him interesting, and he was quiet, which made him trusted. He bought a patch of land nobody else wanted, the kind that sloped too steep for easy plowing, and he built a house and a hog barn with his own hands. He showed up in church every Sunday, sitting in the second row, singing with a voice low enough to never offend the choir. He volunteered to patch the pastor's roof, to dig graves in winter, to haul feed sacks for widows. He was the kind of man a small town collects like a good tool, useful and uncomplaining. When he started bringing pork to market, people praised him for his generosity. He sold whole sides for a price that made other farmers squint and mutter. He said God had blessed his herd, and he was only sharing that blessing. It was a sweet story, and sweet stories are hard to question when your children are hungry. The first time I crossed into that part of the county, I was not hunting monsters. I was traveling for my own work, taking notes on old church records and family plots for a book I had promised a publisher who liked my voice. My name is not the point, but I had made a habit of walking into quiet towns and listening to what they tried not to say. Harrow Creek was the kind of place where silence sat heavy, where people smiled too quickly and looked past you when you asked where the missing had gone. They wanted the fear to stay outside the walls of their kitchens, and I understood that. But fear does not stay where you put it. It seeps into wells, into sermons, into the way dogs bark at night. I noticed it first in the market. The butcher had stopped hanging pork in the front window. He kept it behind the counter now, wrapped tight as if meat itself had become something shameful. A woman buying chops asked me where I was from, then asked how I knew the road here, then asked if I was alone. Her eyes flicked toward my coat pockets, like she was checking for a wedding ring that might keep me safe. When I told her I was only passing through, she nodded too hard and whispered, "Keep to the town road at night, not the ridge." I asked why. She glanced over her shoulder and said, "Folks go missing on the ridge." I asked if that was true. She said, "It is true enough for me." That evening I sat in the tavern and listened. Men leaned in and spoke in low bursts. They talked about hoofprints that ended in creek mud, about wagon tracks that cut off into corn and never came out, about a boy who claimed he saw a lantern swinging in the woods long after midnight, moving toward Enoch Lane. But every time the talk got close to accusation, someone would clear his throat and say, "Now Enoch is a God-fearing man. Let's not get carried away." That line kept repeating in different mouths, like a prayer to protect a fragile belief. It was the pastor's line first. Pastor Ellis Ward had been in Harrow Creek long enough to baptize half the town and bury the other half. He was a tired man with kind eyes and a voice that trembled with conviction. I visited him under the pretense of looking at parish ledgers. In his study, the air smelled of old paper and lemon oil. He poured me weak coffee and asked what brought me to their ridges. I told him my real reason, that I had heard about the missing and wanted to know if he had concerns. He sighed and rubbed his temples. He said the world was in a restless season, that roads invited temptation, that some souls wandered too far without God's protection. I asked if he thought bandits were responsible. He said bandits were a convenient story. I asked if he thought someone local could be involved. His eyes lifted then, sharp for a moment, and he said, "Careful with that kind of thought. This town only survives because we trust each other." I told him trust is not the same as safety. He did not answer, but when I left, I noticed his hands were shaking. The next morning, I rode the ridge anyway, because my work required a stop at a family plot beyond the creek bend. I carried a pistol, not because I believed in danger, but because I had learned that belief often comes after a man is already dead. The road was quiet. Corn brushed my boots. Cicadas screamed. Halfway to the bend, I saw the first sign of something wrong. A shoe in the ditch. Black leather cracked, heel worn thin. It looked like it had been tossed aside, not lost in struggle. I stopped and picked it up. The size was small, maybe a woman, maybe a boy. There was mud on the sole, but no blood. I turned it over in my hands and felt a chill in that blazing heat. I tucked it into my saddlebag. I rode on. That was when I heard the hogs. That was when I saw the lane. Enoch Farm sat behind a stand of trees like a secret. The house was plain, gray boards, a porch that sagged a little at the corners. The hog barn stood farther back, long and low with slats that let shadows breathe through. The pen beside it was full of pigs, huge pale bodies rolling in mud. When they saw my horse, they crowded the fence and stared with pale eyes that looked too calm for animals who should have been excited for feed. Enoch appeared on the porch as I dismounted. He was taller than I expected, broad in the shoulders, with a farmer's strength that comes from years of lifting things that do not want to move. His hair was dark with a streak of gray at the temples. His face was ordinary, in a way that should have been comforting, but was not. There was a softness at the corners of his mouth that could be read as kindness or as practice. He greeted me by name before I introduced myself. That caught me off guard. He said Pastor Ward told me a writer was in town poking at old graves. I said yes, I was headed to one beyond the creek. He said you can rest here, storm might come later. I looked at the sky, clear and cruel blue. I said I did not see. A storm. He smiled and said, storms do not always show until they are on you. His voice was gentle. His eyes did not blink much. I thanked him and said I did not want to impose. He insisted. Insistence in a lonely place can feel like kindness or like a trap. I told myself I was being dramatic. I stepped onto his porch. The boards were clean, scrubbed so hard the wood grain shone. The air near the door smelled of lye and smoke. Enoch asked if I ate meat. I said yes. He said, good, I have fresh pork, just butchered this morning. You can take some for the road. I said that was generous. He said, God provides, we only pass it along. I noticed then that his hands were clean too. No blood under the nails, no old stains on the cuffs. But the smell from the hog barn was still in the air, faint but metallic. I asked him what he fed his pigs. He said whatever the land gives. He said pigs are not picky. Then he looked past me toward my saddlebag and said, you found something on the road. It was not a question. I felt my spine tighten. I asked how he knew. He said the ridge keeps leaving pieces behind, like it wants to confess. I did not tell him about the shoe. I should have turned right then. Instead, I followed him into his kitchen, because social habits are a chain that can pull you into a grave. The kitchen was spotless. A pot simmered on the stove, the smell rich and savory. Enoch set out a bowl and a spoon for me, like he had done it 100 times for strangers. He said, eat. I said I would after I finished my work. He waited, smiling faintly, and I felt that odd pressure again. The insistence, dressed as hospitality. I asked him if he had heard about the missing travelers. His smile did not change. He said, roads take what they take. I asked if any had stopped here. He said plenty stop. We are all tired on the ridge. I asked if he had seen Walter Hume. He said the name sounded familiar. He said a lot of men pass through with big plans and empty pockets. I asked if he kept records, maybe of who signed his guest book. He laughed softly and said, I am a farmer, not a hotel. Then he leaned closer and said, but I do remember faces. I remember yours now. That line landed like a weight. I ate a spoonful of stew to avoid staring. The taste was good. Too good. I told myself it was pork, nothing more. Yet as I chewed, one of the hog screams rose again from outside, and this time I was sure it was not a fight. It was a sound of hunger being answered. Enoch listened to it with something like satisfaction. Then he said, you should not be on the road after dark. There are things out here that do not mind taking a man apart. He said it the way someone warns you about wolves. But his eyes stayed on my face as if measuring how much fear had entered. I set my spoon down. I told him I needed to go. He did not argue. He only nodded and walked me to the door. On the porch, I swung up into my saddle. He handed me a wrapped bundle of meat. I hesitated. He said, take it. It will keep. I took it because refusing felt dangerous in some quiet way I could not explain. As I rode off, I looked back once. Enoch stood in his doorway watching, still as a post. Behind him, the kitchen window reflected the hog barn, dark against bright sky, and for a blink I thought I saw movement inside the barn that did not match the pigs outside. A human shadow, maybe. Or maybe only my mind filling in what fear wanted. I rode faster. I told myself I would laugh about it later. I did not laugh. That night in Harrow Creek, I could not finish the meat he gave me. I kept seeing his clean hands, his calm pigs, his way of saying my name like he owned it. I slept with the shoe beside my bed, like a talisman. Sometime near midnight, I woke to a sound outside the tavern window. Faint but clear in the stillness. A wagon rolling slowly down the street. Then another sound, a soft whistle, low and brief, like a signal. I rose and looked out through the curtain. A lantern moved through the fog, heading toward the ridge road. There was someone walking beside it, leading a mule, and trailing behind, barely visible, was a second figure I recognized by his height and the way his shoulders held the night. Enoch Straley was going back to his farm, and he was not alone. I stood there in the dark with my chest tight, watching that lantern slide away like a slow wound across the street. The tavern had gone quiet except for a drunk snoring over a table and a fly that would not stop circling the lamp. I told myself there were a dozen harmless reasons for a man to be on the road at night. A sick calf, a neighbor in trouble, a prayer that needed to be spoken where no one could hear. But the mule did not look sick, and the man leading it did not look like a neighbor. He was bent under a pack that made his shoulders hunch, and he kept glancing back as if checking for someone. Enoch walked behind him at an easy distance, not close enough to seem like an escort, not far enough to look like a stranger. The two figures turned toward the ridge, passed into the fog, and disappeared. For a long time I did not move. Then I went back to my bed, but sleep would not take me. When morning came, I ate nothing, only drank coffee until my hand steadied, and then I went looking for Sheriff Pike. The sheriff office sat beside the courthouse, a brick cube with a tin star nailed to the door. Pike was a square-built man with a jaw like a shovel blade. He had been a soldier back before the war ended, and the war had not left him. His eyes stayed alert even when he smiled. He greeted me politely, but when I told him what I saw in the night, his face closed like a gate. "You are sure it was Enoch?" he asked. I said I was sure enough to bet my horse. He leaned back in his chair and drew a slow breath. He said, "Enoch makes a late trip now and then. He sells hogs to a buyer across the creek, so maybe he was meeting him." I reminded him there was no buyer who met at midnight. Pike did not argue. Instead, he asked me if I had any proof. I put the shoe on his desk. His brow lifted. "Where did you find this?" he asked. I told him on the ridge, in the ditch before Enoch Lane. Pike picked it up and turned it over. He said, "This looks like Hume's daughter's shoe." I felt cold again. Pike asked why I did not bring it sooner. I said I did not know who to trust. He nodded once like he understood. Then he set the shoe down and said, "I will ask Enoch about it." I said ask him with 2 deputies and a warrant. Pike gave me a look that was half warning, half fatigue. "We do not wave warrants around on a man's land unless we have a firm reason," he said, people already tense. "If I go stomping into his barn on a hunch and he is innocent, I lose whatever trust keeps this county stitched together." I told him trust did not bring travelers back. He stared at the shoe for a long time. Then he said, "You can ride with me if you want to see what happens." We left before noon. Pike brought Deputy Marlowe and Deputy Kit, both young, both trying too hard to look fearless. The road to Enoch Farm ran through woods that seemed thicker in daytime than they had at dusk. The pines leaned together like they were listening. As we rode, Pike told me what he had avoided saying in town. He said the missing were not the only odd thing this summer. There had been rumors about bones found near the creek, stripped clean. There had been talk of a smell coming from the ridge after rain, like a grave turned inside out. There had been a report of a traveler who reached a neighboring county half mad, saying a farmer offered dinner and then locked him in a cellar. The man had escaped through a crawl hole, but no one knew which farm. Pike said every story pointed in a different direction, but they all lived close to Enoch Land. Still, Pike had known Enoch through church and market for years. He had watched Enoch donate to widows, carry a sick child to a doctor, sit by a dying man, and read psalms until dawn. Pike said he could not square that man with a butcher of people. I understood. Monsters often show up wearing work gloves and quiet smiles. When we reached the lane, the pigs were already clustered at the fence again, staring as if they sensed company before we did. The barn doors were shut. The yard was too clean. Enoch came out of the house, wiping his hands on a cloth. He smiled when he saw Pike, but the smile was thinner now. "Sheriff," he said, "what brings you out?" Pike said we found something on the road. He held the shoe up. Enoch studied it a moment. His face did not twitch. Then he said, "Looks like a shoe." Pike asked if any traveler had left it here. Enoch said none that he knew. Pike said the shoe belonged to a missing girl. Enoch said, "I am sorry to hear that." Pike asked where Enoch was last night. Enoch did not hesitate. He said, "I went to the Kolb place to trade for grain." Pike asked why at night. Enoch said because Mr. Kolb works days and sleeps early, and I prefer not to waste hours of daylight on talk. Pike asked who was with him. Enoch said no one. I felt Marlowe shift in his saddle. Pike kept his voice even. He said, "A man in town saw you on the road with another figure and a mule." Enoch looked at Pike, then at each of us, then back at the sheriff. He did not look angry. He looked amused, almost pitying. He said people in town see what they want when fear gets hungry. He said if there was a mule on the road, it was not mine. Pike studied him, longer than comfortable. Then he said I would like to look around, Enoch, just to calm folks down. Enoch spread his hands. "You are welcome," he said. "I got nothing to hide. But watch your step. Pigs get restless." Pike dismounted. We followed him. Enoch led us into the barn first. The smell hit me before the door opened fully. It was not just manure and feed. There was another note under it, a sour rot that stung the back of the nose. The interior was dim. A line of pens ran along both sides, full of hogs bigger than any I had seen in the county. They were thick in the shoulders, scarred on the flanks, eyes pale and unblinking. They did not squeal or root when we entered. They watched. A trough in each pen held slop that looked too dark for corn mash. Pike asked what he fed them. Enoch said corn, acorns, scraps. Pike pointed to the slop. Enoch said blood meal from the butchers in town. Good for fattening. Pike did not flinch, but I saw Marlowe swallow. We walked deeper. At the far end was a small room partitioned off with rough boards. Enoch said, "This is where I keep tools." Pike asked to see it. Enoch stepped aside. Pike opened the door. Inside was a table, a rack of knives, a block stained nearly black, and hooks overhead. Any farmer who butchered hogs had such a space. But there was a chain bolted to the floor, heavy with a padlock still latched. Pike crouched and ran his hand along it. He looked up. Enoch said, "I use that to keep boars from snapping while I work." Pike said the chain looked too long for that. Enoch shrugged. Better safe. Pike stood, and in that moment a hog somewhere behind us let out a short squeal, then another. Then a wave of sound ran through the pens like a gust of wind. The animals pressed forward. Their bodies slammed against slats. Enoch clicked his tongue, and the noise fell back to a low rumble. Pike stepped out of the room and asked to see the cellar. Enoch said there is no cellar. Pike said every house out here has one. Enoch said mine does not. Pike looked at him, then at the house. He said, "I still want to check." Enoch did not protest. He led us to the back door, into the kitchen I had seen the day before. It was as clean as a church altar. Pike lifted a corner rug. Nothing. He opened a pantry, flour, jars, dried herbs. He knocked on walls, hollow only with emptiness. Then Kit, who had wandered toward the hearth, bent and touched the iron ring set into a stone slab near the stove. "Sheriff," he said softly. Pike went there, knelt and hauled. The slab did not move. He looked at Enoch. Enoch said, "That stone's been there since I built the place. It is part of the foundation." Pike pulled again. The stone shifted a fraction, and a cold draft rolled out, smelling of damp earth and something older. Pike stood. Enoch did not move. Pike said, "Open it." Enoch stared at him. His voice stayed mild. "You got no warrant, Sheriff." Pike said, "Open it anyway." Enoch looked at the deputies. Then he spoke like a man reciting scripture. "If you open that, you will find nothing but dirt and old mistakes," Pike said. That is for me to judge. Enoch sighed, knelt, and lifted the slab with a strength that made his arms knot. A square hole gaped beneath, a ladder descending into dark. Pike lit a lantern and went down first. I followed. The air grew colder with each rung. At the bottom, the cellar was smaller than expected. Not meant for storage. The walls were packed clay. The floor was bare. In the lantern light, I saw marks on the ground, long grooves like something heavy had been dragged. Along one wall were iron rings set into the clay, matching the one upstairs. Beside them lay a cracked plate and a tin cup. No dust covered them. Someone had used them recently. Pike walked to the far corner. There was a pile of straw there, and beneath it something white showed through. He moved the straw aside. A human hand stared up, gray and stiff. For a heartbeat, my mind refused it. Then the shape became real, and my stomach clenched so hard I thought I might black out. Pike did not speak. He moved the lantern closer. The hand was still attached to an arm, the arm to a torso buried under straw and dirt. The face was gone. The body had been stripped in a way that did not belong to any death I had seen. Not butchered clean, like for meat, not mangled by animals on a road. It looked like the body had been started and then abandoned halfway through some process. Kit vomited softly behind me. Pike turned and climbed the ladder without saying a word. When we emerged into the kitchen, the sunlight felt obscene. Enoch was standing where we left him, hands folded. Pike said, "Step outside." Enoch said, "You found your dirt and mistakes." Pike drew his pistol. Enoch did not resist. He walked out onto the porch and down into the yard. The pigs had gone silent again, waiting. Pike cuffed Enoch in front of all of us. Enoch looked at the pigs as if checking something, then looked at Pike and said, "You should keep your men away from the pen. They get excited when they smell fresh blood." Pike said, "You can tell me about blood in a minute." He marched Enoch to the wagon. We tied him in and started back. Halfway down the lane, Marlowe rode up beside me, his face paper pale. He said, "The body in that cellar. The hand had a ring, like a wedding ring." I said, "Yes." He said, "You think it was the missing couple?" I said, "I think it was one of them." He looked sick again. We rode in silence. Harrow Creek erupted when we arrived. People spilled from shops and porches. Someone saw the wagon, saw Enoch, tied inside, and began to shout. The shout became a roar. Women cried. Men reached for rifles. Pastor Ward pushed through the crowd, face ashen. He asked Pike what happened. Pike said, "Bring your people home. There is death on that farm." Ward stumbled back like he had been struck. The crowd surged closer, wanting a look at Enoch. Enoch met their eyes calmly. Some yelled murderer. Others yelled there must be a mistake. Enoch said nothing. Pike got him into the jailhouse before the mob could touch him. Then Pike turned to the crowd and told them to go. He said he would handle it by law. The crowd did not want law. They wanted a story to soothe their terror. They wanted a monster they could tear apart. Pike held them off with deputies and the weight of his reputation, but even he knew it would not last all night. In the jail office, he sat across from Enoch at a rough table. The lantern light made Enoch's skin look waxy. Pike poured coffee for himself, none for Enoch. He said, "I want you to tell me who that body is." Enoch said, "I don't know." Pike leaned forward and slammed his fist once. "Tell the truth," he said. Enoch blinked slowly. He said, "The truth is heavy." Pike said, "You will carry it anyway." For a long time, Enoch stared at the wall. Then he asked for a Bible. Pike hesitated, then nodded to Marlowe. Marlowe brought the jail Bible, frayed and soft. Enoch opened it. Not to read but to hold, fingers pressed against the pages like a man pressing a wound. Then he said, "I tried." Pike said, "Tried what?" Enoch said, "To keep the hunger quiet." Pike said, "What hunger?" Enoch looked up. For the first time his eyes seemed alive, not with fear but with something deeper, older. He said, "You ever raise pigs, Sheriff?" Pike said, "Yes." Enoch said, "Then you know they eat anything." Pike said, "I know." Enoch said, "I also know what men will do when cold and broke and alone." Pike said, "Start from the beginning." Enoch took a breath that rattled. He began to speak, and as he spoke, the room seemed to shrink around the words. He said he was born in a river county farther south, on a farm that burned in a drought year. His father died of fever. His mother sold the land and took him north with a new husband. The new husband drank, beat Enoch. When Enoch was 15, he ran. He worked slaughterhouses, drover camps, anywhere that paid in food. He learned to cut meat fast. He learned to stomach blood without blinking. He said the work did not just teach him skill, it taught him a kind of numbness. When the war came, he enlisted. He said war did not bother him the way it bothered others. Men were already animals in his mind, and animals were already meat. He said he saw men freeze, starve, eat horses, eat rats. He said hunger makes rules into smoke. When the war ended, he wandered again. He heard about ridges where land was cheap. He came to Harrow Creek. He wanted a quiet life. He wanted God. He built the barn. He bought piglets. He read his Bible. He tried to be the man the town believed him to be. Pike asked, when the killing started. Enoch closed his eyes. He said, "It started before the killing." He said the first winter on his farm was brutal. His corn failed. His pigs got sick. He had no money. He said he went hungry for weeks, and one night a traveler knocked on his door, a peddler with a pack full of tins. The man offered to trade a frying pan for a meal. Enoch said he invited him in. He said he fed him soup. He said he listened to the man talk about a family waiting for him in the next county, a wife and a little boy. Enoch said as he listened, he felt something twist inside him, not envy but a raw vacancy. He said the peddler fell asleep by the fire. Enoch said he stared at him for hours. He said he thought about the pigs, about how they were thin and dying, and how if they died he would die next. He said he also thought about what he had seen in war, how a man body is just flesh. He said he did not plan it, not in any sane way. He said he picked up the axe by the hearth and brought it down on the peddler head. Pike flinched but did not stop him. Enoch went on. He said the sound was soft, like splitting wet wood. He said he dragged the body to the barn before dawn, cut it the way he knew how, and fed it to the pigs. He said the pigs ate with a joy that frightened him and relieved him at the same time. He said after they ate, they looked healthier. He said he waited for guilt to kill him. It did not. He said he prayed, begged God to strike him down. But snow kept falling, hunger kept gnawing, pigs kept needing feed. Pike asked what happened to the tins. Enoch said he sold them in town. He said no one asked where he got them. Pike asked if the peddler name was the German who went missing. Enoch nodded once. Pike asked if he killed again. Enoch said, "Not right away." He said he went months without another traveler, and time made the memory feel unreal. Then spring came and the road got busy. Another traveler stopped, a man with a broken wheel, asking to camp in the barnyard. Enoch said he told himself no. He said he told himself he was done. But that night he heard the pigs squeal with hunger, and he smelled the traveler bacon he had cooked outside, and the smell of meat in the air lit that same twist inside him. He said he killed the man while he slept. He said each time got easier. He said he started leaving a lantern near the ridge turn, not to lure people exactly, but to offer a visible promise of shelter. Travelers saw it and came. Some came willingly. Some he met on the road with a soft voice and a lie about storms. Enoch said he was careful. He said he never killed more than he had to. Pike asked what that meant. Enoch said he killed when the pigs were hungry and when he was hungry. Pike said you sold pork so cheap because you did not buy feed. Enoch said yes. Pike asked how many. Enoch stared into the Bible. He said he stopped counting after 10. Pike felt his jaw tighten. He asked about the couple. Enoch said the couple were kind. He said the woman was pregnant. He said he almost let them go. He said almost is not a shield. Pike asked why the body in the cellar was not fully gone. Enoch said, "Because I got careless." He said the couple arrived while he was already sick in mind, already hearing things. He said he killed the man first, then locked the woman in the cellar to decide what to do. He said he heard her praying down there, and the prayers sounded like his mother voice, and it made him hesitate. He said after 2 days he went down with food, and she tried to stab him with a nail she had pulled from the ladder. He said he hit her. He said he dragged her back. He said he planned to finish it later. But then the hogs got loose in a storm, and he had to chase them all night. When he came back, the woman had died. Maybe from the blow, maybe from fear. He said the pigs ate most of her on the 3rd day. He said he buried the rest under straw and forgot. Pike sat there with his hands clasped so tight, the knuckles had gone white. He asked about Walter Hume. Enoch shook his head. He said Hume never stopped there. Pike said then why Hume missing? Enoch said, maybe another man on another road. Maybe God decided to balance the scales with a story you could believe. Pike did not like that answer, but he could not prove it false. The confession ended there, like a door shutting. Pike stepped out to breathe. I followed. Outside the jail, the crowd had grown. Faces lit by torches. I could feel the tension in the air like static. Pike raised his hands and told them to go home, said Enoch would stand trial. Someone yelled, "Trial won't bring them back." Someone else yelled, "Pigs ate my cousin." A stone hit the jail wall. Pike drew his pistol and fired into the air. The crack silenced the crowd for a moment, but not for long. Pastor Ward stood at the edge of the mob, tears running down his face. He did not yell. He looked older than he had days ago. Pike told me quietly, "They will try to hang him before dawn." I said, "What will you do?" He said, "Move him. Tonight." We moved Enoch through the back in a wagon covered with hay. Marlowe and Kit rode ahead. I rode behind. The moon was a thin slice. The woods swallowed the road. Enoch sat silent under the hay, bound at wrists and ankles. I expected him to pray, to beg, to rage. He did none of it. Halfway to the county line, he spoke once, voice muffled. He said, "You the writer?" I said, "Yes." He asked why you looking at me like you want to understand. I said, "Because I do not believe a man wakes up one day and decides to be a thing like this." He was quiet. Then he said, "It is not a decision. It is a door you find inside yourself, and once you open it, you are always walking through it even when you think you are standing still." After that, he said nothing. We delivered him to the larger jail in Red Hollow by sunrise. The sheriff there signed the papers, took the prisoner, and thanked Pike for getting him out alive. Pike looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a night. When we rode back through Harrow Creek, the town felt hollowed. People stood in doorways with arms crossed, not sure if they wanted to cry or cheer. The market was closed. Dogs would not bark. The ridge road lay empty like a vein cut. Pike called for a posse that afternoon to search Enoch Farm. I went with them. We found more than any mine should carry. Beneath the hog barn floor we uncovered pits lined with lime and ash. In those pits were bones, mostly stripped, some still showing teeth marks, buttons, buckles, bits of cloth. A pocket watch melted from weather, a locket with a small portrait inside, a child's toy soldier. We found rings in a bucket of water, as if Enoch had been washing them with the same care he washed his porch boards. We found a ledger in his tool room, not a guest book, but a list of dates and weights, notes about how much pork he sold after each traveler season. We found places on a hand-drawn map with marks that matched every missing report. When the posse saw the evidence, men who had defended Enoch a week earlier sat down in the dirt and wept. A woman fainted when she recognized a shawl knot. A boy ran to the pens and tried to climb the fence, screaming for his brother. Pike pulled him back. The pigs watched all of it, fat and calm like they had already digested the county grief into themselves. One of the posse men wanted to shoot them on the spot. Pike said no. He said they are animals, not devils. The man said, "They ate my wife," Pike said. "Then let the ground take the blame too, because it grew the corn that fed them." We drove the pigs into wagons and sent them to the state slaughterhouse, not for meat to sell, but to be burned. No one wanted those animals in their food chain. Still, the smell of smoke from that burning lingered in the valley for days, and people swore they could taste it in their mouths when they woke. The trial began that winter. Newspapers from the cities came to Red Hollow. They called it the Hog Butcher case. They wrote Enoch name big across the front page with words like fiend and cannibal. They printed drawings of pigs with human eyes. They sensationalized every detail the way distant people do when tragedy is not theirs. The courtroom was packed. Families of the missing sat in rows, holding hands hard enough to bruise. Enoch walked in wearing shackles, face pale but composed. He pleaded guilty. The judge asked if he understood what that meant. Enoch said yes. The judge asked if he wanted to speak. Enoch stood and told the story again, shorter this time. No war, memories, no mother, only a blunt confession. Some people sobbed, some spat. Pastor Ward was there too, sitting alone near the back. When the judge sentenced Enoch to hang, Ward closed his eyes as if praying for the first time in months. After court, the family's whisper asked me why Enoch did it. I could not give good answers. Hunger is not a full answer. War is not a full answer. Loneliness is not a full answer. A man can walk through all those and still not open that door. But some doors open by themselves, and sometimes the only thing that matters is that they do. Enoch was executed in early spring on a cold morning with salete blowing sideways. The state built the gallows behind the Red Hollow jail. Only officials and a few witnesses were allowed, but half the county waited outside the fence anyway, as if they needed to hear the rope creak to believe the story had ended. I was one of the witnesses. Enoch climbed the steps without stumbling. His face looked older than the man I met on the porch, but not more afraid. The priest asked if he wanted final words. Enoch looked out over the yard, not at the officials, but toward the distant hills. He said, "I thought feeding pigs would bury what I did, but pigs don't bury. They turn everything into themselves. I turned into something too. I'm sorry. It was not a dramatic statement. It sounded like a tired fact. The hood went over his head. The lever fell. A few women screamed. Then the body went still." The crowd outside did not cheer. They only went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when you have been holding your breath so long you forget how to inhale. I returned to Harrow Creek after the hanging because I wanted to see what a town does with a wound that deep. The Ridge Road was open again, but travelers still avoided it, taking longer routes. People in Harrow Creek stopped inviting strangers to supper for a while. Children stopped playing near the creek. The market butcher sold pork again, but no one smiled when buying it. Pastor Ward preached sermons about the frailty of man, about how evil can hide in a hymn book and still sing in tune. His voice was steady, but his eyes never looked as kind after that. Sheriff Pike resigned before summer. He told me he could not wear a star anymore without hearing those hog screams in his dreams. He moved west to a place no one knew him. Deputy Marlowe joined him. Deputy Kit stayed, but drank hard, and people said he never ate meat again. As for Enoch Farm, the county seized it and put it up for auction. No one bid, not once. It sat empty through 2 seasons until lightning struck the hog barn in a storm and burned it down to black ribs. Some said it was an accident. Some said God finally found the place. When the fire died, the ground beneath still smelled sweet and rotten, as if the soil itself remembered what had been fed to it. Years later, I passed through Harrow Creek again on a different journey. The tavern had new paint. The market had a new butcher. Children played by the creek again, but they never went near the ridge bend by Enoch Lane. The townsfolk spoke of that summer the way people speak of plague, as something that happened to them rather than something a man chose. Yet in the night when I stayed in the same tavern room, I woke to a different sound, faint and distant, coming off the ridge. Not hog screams this time, just the wind moving through corn and the slow creak of trees. But my mind still shaped it into something human for a breath, because once you hear that kind of hunger in the world, you never fully stop hearing it. And here's the part that still chills me most. Enoch was not a drifter who vanished after his crimes. He was a man everyone knew. He prayed next to them. He carried their dead. He broke bread at their tables. He made them feel safe in a restless world. The lesson in that is simple and hard. Evil does not always come knocking like a stranger. Sometimes it already lives down the lane, selling cheap pork and smiling quietly in church. And the only thing that keeps it from opening its door is the thin distance between a man's need and a man's conscience. When that distance collapses, whole towns can become meals without knowing it, until the bones are found. If this story got under your skin, make sure you subscribe to Tales Never Told, because there are more roads like that ridge road, more houses with clean porches and dark cellars, and more secrets that history tried to feed to the pigs.